Okay, everyone, welcome to the latest rendition of Young Red Angus Live. I'm your host, Jay Young. I'm really excited about this evening. I have my good friend Roy Pfaltzgraff as our guest, and I'm to kind of set up for you guys. I've talked about it last week. I want to reiterate it again this week. Our YouTube channel is focused on what we're doing with our cattle and regenerative agriculture. And so, as I'm teaching principles that we've learned, I wanted to start a YouTube live channel so that I could have on guests of people who have influenced me greatly or other farmers that I think are doing unique and cool things. And so tonight's guest, Roy Pfaltzgraff, is both of those things. Roy farms right around 2,000 acres. He has been regenerative and doing regenerative principles for almost 30 years now, correct, Roy?
Longer than that. Dad started, I would really say in 75, started with plant diversity.
And then in the last 5 years, their operation has really taken off to where they're doing a lot of farm to table products. They're have a wide diversity of plants that they raise. And so I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to you, Roy. Why don't you better describe to them what you are doing on your farming operation, what makes you guys unique compared to everybody else in your area, and then also other people in regenerative agriculture.
Thanks, Jay. I've been looking forward to this. I always enjoy our conversations, and it's kind of the same reason that I go to conferences, because you get to meet and talk with people that challenge your thinking, and so it's good to be here. Yeah, we farm south of a little town called Haxton in northeast Colorado. It's about 30 miles from the Nebraska border, both to the north and to the east. And it's 2,000 acres of dry land. And when we say dry land, we have an average 16 inches of precipitation a year. But the problem with averages is if you have 0 one year and 32 the next year, it is an average of 16 still. This last year, we had about 4.5 inches during the growing season. It was a really rough year. The year before that, we had 22 inches, but the problem is it all came in 45 days, and over 9 inches of that came in one night. So we live in a very dynamic climate, really hot in the summer, really cold in the winter, and wind all the time. So that's our biggest challenge. But yeah, my dad started, he started farming with my grandfather in the mid 70s, and he was always trying to do new things. He first no-till planted in 84. We went 100% no-till in 99. And, since then, we up until when I came back the second time in the winter of 2016, it was the standard wheat spring crop, either corn or sunflowers or millet no-till, and then chem fallow for a year. And so, we were doing that. My father came to me and just told me he couldn't physically do it anymore. So I came back to the operation, and my first stipulation is things have to change, because we were the average farm. We show our biggest goal every year was to break even. You just didn't want to lose money, and that's no way to live. It's super stressful. It's not a lot of fun because you're always under the gun. So biggest thing is I things needed to change. I could tell that. I didn't know how they were going to change, but we went down to the CCTA conference down in Burlington, which I highly recommend to anybody, and sat through a couple of sessions down there that really kind of was a couple of big aha moments that helped us realize some of the things that were going on, the reason why. We always had high protein wheat, always had good quality wheat, and better than neighbors, and we never understood why. And I just happened to choose to go to a session on the Haney test with Lance Gunderson. And sitting in there, it was just like, oh man, this is why. This explains what's going on. And that really kind of lit the fire. And on the way home, I told my folks, and it's like, okay, we're going to start raising more crops. And that first year we raised field peas. I mean, that was the first week of February, and by the second week of March, I had peas in the ground. And that's just kind of how it started. And then, the more I looked at it, we started doing the Haney test. And then when we did the Haney test across the entire farm, we identified some fields that, they were adjoining fields, but one had a soil health score that was 3 points higher than the other. And it's like, why is there such a difference? I mean, these two fields, same soil, same weather. The only thing difference is the rotation. So my dad created a chart from our records that has all of our fields and what crop was in what field going back to 2000. And from that, I then took the fields that had a really good soil health score and compared them to the neighboring fields that didn't. And there's a couple things that popped up. One of them was sunflowers. We see a huge response in soil health after sunflowers. And the other one is the field that had seen more types of crops had a higher soil health score than fields that just had. We actually had one field that was nothing but wheat, fallow from the beginning of time. And so that's when kind of the light came on, and it's like, we got to diversify. And so I started going out looking for what I could find for markets. And, that next year we raised 8 different crops. We went from being at 4 crops to 8 crops, and then it went to 12 crops. We've been as high as 18 crops. We were back down to 14 this last year. And this year we're going to be a little bit less because, the weather forecasters are saying that we're still in La Nina for, the first half of this year, which we've had 2 feet of snow in the last 3 weeks.
Oh, that's awesome.
And well, the problem is some of it's stacked 10 feet tall because of the winds we got. But, at least on every field, there's at least, 4 to 6 inches of snow laying flat, plus whatever the drifts are. And it's like, hey, this might be a start of, something good. And with all the diversity we've been doing, we've yet to do it. It's all been done in La Nina years. And I keep saying, boy, if we get this into an El Nino situation, this thing's really it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be really fun.
Yeah.
Because what we've seen is, we do whole farm revenue insurance, which is a pain, but you actually learn a lot about the, kind of the history of your operation. And with that, we've seen our revenue triple and our expenses double. And so we turned what used to be our gross revenue into our net revenue. And for Northeast Colorado, it's a pretty cool set of books. And it's been fun because then when you're not worried about breaking even every single day, you get to start experimenting with things, and you get a little extra money to throw around. And we got an electro weeder, so I can use electricity to kill weeds, which is freaking awesome. And so it just gives us that opportunity to experiment. And then the connections that I've made with the marketing side of the world, it's pretty much gotten to the point where if there's a crop I want to raise, I know who I can call for a market on it. And since, kind of this whole thing's been, kind of snowballing going down the hill. And it's actually to the point where we're looking at bringing my stepson in this next summer, bring him into the operation, start teaching him what farming is about. He's a farm kid from Chicago, or he's a kid from Chicago that works at a feedlot right now. So he has no farm background. With that, actually looking at branching out and doing more things to help other farmers learn how to do regenerative, learn how to do marketing and stuff like that. So we're different because we've tried so many different things, and there's really nothing that we shy away from. It so far things have tend to work whenever we tried it, and it makes it more exciting to experiment more and more.
Okay, so I want to kind of go back a little bit to that, your comment, because we've talked about this before. When you got the 9-inch rain event, how well did your ground filtrate that water, and what do you attribute your filtration rates to, and what do you attribute that high? Because you guys have a really high filtration rate. What do you attribute your ability to heal the water cycle on your farming operation to?
I don't know how much we took in. I mean, 9 inches of rain in seven, it was actually more than 9 inches in less than 7 hours. It was raining so hard at some points that it was actually flooding through the vents in my roof, because the water on the roof was deeper than what the setback is inside the vent cap. So I have no idea how much we absorbed. I do know it ran off. And the next day I actually had our district conservationist from NRCS out to kind of talk about what was going on and look at stuff. He's super supportive of us, and he came out, and I'm like, oh man, we had stuff run off, and he goes, Roy, that's not runoff, that's overflow. There's a difference. There's when there's just absolutely so much water that you have stuff go, but no soil went with it. And that was the really amazing part, is we had terraces that, they're 3-inch, they're designed for a 3-inch rainfall. I wish we didn't have terraces, because they're kind of a pain to farm around, but the water in those terraces was clear as a bell. So we had wheat, you could see it green still under 3 feet of water. And we actually harvested those terrace bottoms. That wheat continued to photosynthesize underwater and continue to grow. It took about 2 weeks for all that to dry out. And we had stuff running off the neighbors, and that was very enlightening, because since then we've had a bunch of Palmer amaranth problems where the water ran. And I really think it brought in the excess nitrogen off of the neighbors onto our fields, and Palmer is very responsive to nitrogen. And so that, kind of had that little piece to it, but it was amazing to see. Yeah, we absorbed a lot of it, but what we couldn't absorb, it didn't take any soil with it. And that was just awesome to be able to see that, because I've got pictures of what happened in the fields around ours. It took out roads. It was just an amazing event, and I hope I never see one again. But we're in Northeast Colorado; it's anybody's guess.
Right.
It's, to me, it's being no-till since '99. So we're no-till 23 years, and that's 100% no-till. That's not just no-till planting. Every single root channel that was in there had to be chock full. And that's one thing that, sunflowers, because that root system goes so deep, it allows it to, help take that down, and then you get the side channels that, it'll actually fill that. But it was amazing to see the difference. I mean, even in a smaller rain, our fields won't have any water standing in them, but the county roads will have water sitting on the road right next to the field. And so, that the infiltration rate, to me, it's because of diversity and because of residue. We protect that soil as much as we can. We hold it in its place. And with the diversity, we have all the different, root structures that are there. And as they decompose, they open things up. And, we got earthworms out there doing their thing and all that stuff. So it's, the key is not disturbing the soil. And that's what kills it is when you go out there and turn it over.
Yeah, absolutely. So Roy, as you began to open up in 2016, let's talk about the progression of increasing the amount of different crops that you were growing. So like in 2016, what were you guys growing and how did that progress to where it's at now with what you guys have tried?
Boy, I wish I had my charts. I didn't have to do it from memory. I have one of them laying around here somewhere. We, in 2016, we were wheat, millet, fallow. It was everything that we had. 17, we added field peas and we drilled sunflowers for the first time. Drilled them on 12-inch centers with our air seeder. 17 was field peas. We had sunflowers in 160 acres. We had millet, we had some milo, and I think 17 might have been the first year we had buckwheat. And then 18, we added chickpeas, intercropped with flax to control ascochyta. We added black-eyed peas at that point. Then the following year, we did pinto beans for the first time. In 21, we tried some black beans. We tried some navies. The navies just need a little more water than what we get. The black beans rock in the super dry kind of things. We brought corn back 3 years ago. We drill it on 12-inch centers. We drill everything. We have a planter. If somebody wants it, it's for sale. It's a very nice 8-row white that has been sitting in a tree row for probably 14 years. It'd be a great toolbar for somebody probably. But since then, I'm trying to think, we were going to try lentils one year, but the seed that we had lined up out of Montana, the guy backed out on us and didn't call us. It was one of those desperate for seed. So I call him up and he's like, oh yeah, I found out I didn't have enough seed for you. I was going to call you. And it's like, oh, it'd have been nice to know. We've tried to get some canary and still struggling to get seed out of Canada on canary. This last year, we actually tried about 10 varieties of heirloom rice in very small scale plots, like in my garden. Because of that, and I met a fellow, we became pretty quick friends because of rice. He's a rice farmer in the South. And there's a particular variety I've been trying to source, and he's going to track it down for me. And we're really shooting to actually have 5 acres of dryland rice this next year. Okay. But yeah, it's just one of those kind of, every year we kind of add 1 or 2, and we subtracted some, and kind of trying to get a feel for what we like. But the problem is with our direct marketing stuff, that's starting to drive a little bit of stuff. And with that, we're actually looking at rebuilding the first air seeder we ever bought back in '99, rebuilding it down to a 16-foot air seeder on 3-inch spacing. And so we can do a lot of specialty beans, in just acre plot kind of thing. But yeah, it's just kind of well, we added oats 4 years ago. Grain sorghum has been around off and on forever, but we've had it the last couple years. But yeah, it's just kind of what can I find for markets? What do I find that's profitable, and also what's good for the soil? I mean, that's why we raise buckwheat, is it does awesome things for the soil. It just happens to be we lucked into a market, a gluten-free malting company buys all of our buckwheat and they malt it, and it goes to breweries all around the world to make gluten-free beer. So it's just kind of what's available and what strikes my fancy, and
And
then
that
what fits in
that company
rotation.
that buys the buckwheat, they're still looking for quite a few people, aren't they?
They've been through a number. The problem is getting the quality, and to be able to certify it gluten-free is a pain in the butt. But there's actually a company, if somebody's looking to grow buckwheat, there's a company up in North Dakota that will buy every bit of buckwheat they can get their hands on, and it doesn't matter if it's gluten-free or not. There's a huge market for buckwheat. There's actually a high-end restaurant in Denver that I know the chef, and their current menu, it's one of those restaurants where you don't order, they tell you what you're going to have for dinner. And every item on the menu for their winter menu actually contains buckwheat in some form.
That's cool.
And so it's really an up and coming crop. People are really interested in eating buckwheat. It's super healthy for you. And it's very common in Eastern European diets. It's just not very common in our diet.
So Roy, I think when people hear that you're doing that many different crops, they begin to think about it in their own mind, and they begin to hyperventilate, and it overwhelms them. So let's go ahead and just break it down simply for them. What are your processes in first figuring out how you're going to grow these crops? And then let's take it into the marketing side of things, of how do you begin to find the markets to sell buckwheat and to sell these things. And so kind of take them on that journey of how they have to change that perspective to be able to do this, because it's not that difficult to be able to do what you do, but the mindset has to be different. So why don't you talk about that, and then talk about what you practically do to be able to find these markets and figure out how to grow it when you've never grown it before, what herbicides you can spray before, after, during, or all that.
Believe it or not, we actually run it backwards. We start with marketing. My dad told me when I came back, he fought with his father-in-law for 40 years on trying to try new things. And so when I came back and I told him we need to do something different, my dad said, as long as there's a market for it and there's a chance of profitability, he goes, we'll do it. And so we can't raise anything that we don't have a market for, is what it comes down to, because I don't want to eat that much of whatever it is. So with the buckwheat, I wanted to raise it because it does great things for the soil. It actually converts, thanks to Lance Gunderson, a great guy, super knowledgeable, love to talk with him. The exudates of buckwheat actually feed a particular family of bacteria that are called lithotrophs. And in Latin, lithotroph is actually literally means rock eater. And those bacteria will eat the rock in microscopic in our soils. Our soils have tons of phosphorus in, but it's not in a form that's accessible to plants. So the buckwheat exudates triggers these microbes that are naturally in soils to go out there and produce this extra phosphorus. And so when I heard that, I was like, I want to raise buckwheat because phosphorus is one area that we always are, it's kind of our lowest area. Um, so that's where it started, is I want to raise buckwheat. And then I found out the buckwheat honey is some special stuff that has a specialty market. So then it's like, we're going to get bees, and Dad's like, well, where are you going to sell the buckwheat at? And it's like, I don't know. I can sell the honey though. And so I just started talking to people, and was at a millet growers meeting, and I was talking with a neighbor who was chatting with a friend of his from over by Roggen, and I said, do you guys ever heard any buckwheat markets? And the one guy goes, actually, I know somebody that's looking for somebody to grow it, and got a phone number. And cold calling is always fun. It's even more fun when you're trying to sell something you've never even raised before. But at that point, I got on the internet and just started searching, and came across Mindak, which are the guys up in North Dakota that will buy every single bit of buckwheat that somebody can produce. And talked with them, and they were super informative. And then I think it's Cornell has a website that is just about buckwheat, like how to raise it, how to harvest it, all the nutritional value for it. Actually makes really good hay. So just got on the internet and started digging and started making some phone calls. And now it's really easy for me because I have those connections. I know who I should call. But back then, it was just like, find something on the internet, call them up, say, hey, I'm a farmer in Northeast Colorado, and I'm going to raise buckwheat this next year, and was wondering, do you know somebody who'd be interested? And so that's we start on the marketing side. Now, once we have marketing, we work with an agronomist, Jared. He's a great guy. His background in soil health isn't really strong because he was, he went to school back in the time when it was all about NPK. But his attitude is if there's something you want to raise, he goes, I can figure out how to make it grow here. So he kind of has that chip on his shoulder of, if you want to raise something weird, he goes, we'll figure out how to make it work. And so that's what it's been. This last year when I had rice growing in the garden, I called him up and said, hey, I want you to come over to my place and look at this rice. And he gets over here and he's like, well, I don't know what I'm looking at. And I'm like, yeah, but we better start looking now, because when we start having more rice, at least we can be familiar with it. And so a lot of it is just finding people on the internet to talk to, finding resources on the internet. And in the regenerative space, there's a lot of really great people that are willing to share. They have that kind of same view as I do of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People talks about the abundance principle. We live in a world of abundance. There are markets everywhere. If you don't believe that, go to a city with 1 million people in it and look around. Those people are eating stuff every day. Where's that coming from? And so, I believe there's tons of markets and tons of opportunity. And I have a friend that used to work for Ardent Mills, and he said to me once that he's like, I don't understand farmers. And it's like, Mike, I don't know what there is to understand about farmers. We're actually pretty simple. Not super complex here. And he goes, yeah, but you guys, you fight over the same piece of the pie and you live in the bakery. And that's when it was kind of like, yeah, we could raise whatever we want. I mean, as long as it's not something that just absolutely will not work here, we can't raise oranges, but chances are we can find some strain of whatever crop that we want. I mean, of the varieties of rice that I raised this last year, one of them was from Sweden. Who knew that there was rice in Sweden, kind of thing.
There's rice in Eastern Colorado.
Yeah, there's rice in Eastern Colorado, but other than the grocery store. It's people just have to kind of be willing to open themselves up a little bit and, ignore the neighbors and what the neighbors are saying. I guarantee it. Well, I know for a fact that the neighbors are laughing about us. Our crop insurance agent was out here this last spring, and he was like, I had some of your neighbors were in my office the other day, and they were sitting there and they were making fun of what you guys are doing. And he was like, it was so hard for me to sit there and listen to that, because we do whole farm revenue. So he sees our books. He sees our Schedule F. So, he knows what we're reporting. And he's like, man, if they knew what was going on, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. And it's like, yeah, let them laugh. I don't care. I'm paying my bills. They're not paying my bills, and so we just let it go at that. But yeah, for me, I start at the marketing side and then work backwards. Now, when it comes down to some crops like dry edible beans, people always believe there's no markets around them. And I always tell them, get the phone book out. I always thought there was no markets around us, and come to find out there's 6 dry edible bean companies within 100 miles of the farm. And so after I harvest my beans, I get on the phone and we find out who's got the best price, and that's where we go. And so some crops are really easy to move. Dry edible beans, any bean company will talk to you about them. Even if they don't use them themselves, they know somebody who does. A lot of our stuff still goes to the elevator, depending upon what it is. And, sometimes we raise non-GMO corn. I try to find a specialty market for it, but if I can't, it goes to the elevator. It doesn't matter. That's, I'm making money on that because I don't have the inputs that everybody else does. I don't spend a lot of money on it, so I really don't have to make a lot of money to break even. And when 50 bushel corn will make you good money when you don't have much in it more than some seed and an application of herbicide.
So Roy, we had a great question from Brian here. Brian wanted to know, and I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it for them. Do you have trouble explaining that to your banker to get loans, and talk about what the beginning process looked like and what it was like now?
When the first year when we added field peas, it was no big deal because it was 90 acres. When we started raising buckwheat, that's when it got challenging for the banker. And that year, I think we had 12 or 13 crops, and my dad was putting together the cash flow. So we sat down and he's like, well, tell me each crop, where are you going to sell it? How much are you going to get for it? So that way he could build the cash flow. And he just happened to write all this down on this piece of paper. And when he turned everything into the loan officer, he included a copy of that just as an aside. He didn't think it was very, it didn't matter. The loan officer looked at the books, well into the black, good looking set of books. And he took it to the loan committee, and the loan committee looked at it and, nope, this reminds us too much. They loaned a bunch of money to an organic operation, and that's when Amazon bought Whole Foods and all the contracts got tore up, and they lost their shirt in this organic farm, and they're not interested. There's too much marketing issues. And so the loan officer, dawned on him, hold it, I got this other piece of paper in the file that explains where all this stuff's going. So he went and he made copies of that, and we included, what had been contracted already and all of that stuff. And he took that to the loan committee, and they took one look at it, and they're like, well, this is a no-brainer. We didn't realize it had already been sold, and the problem is the next year we had to do the exact same thing. And the next year we had to do the same thing. And the following year we had to do the same thing. And I was getting really tired of having to prove what we were doing works every year when it had worked the previous year. And so we actually changed banks this last year. And we went with one that's definitely more business minded, not agriculturally minded. I know our bank had a big issue that at harvest, they expected us just to haul everything to market and sell it. And that way we could pay down on the note. And it's like, well, we're delivering buckwheat and millet and oats now and corn and maybe some Milo to this malting company. And they only want so much a month. And so we just can't haul it all in and sell it. And that really bothered them. And I don't know why it bothered them so much when, we're handling these different markets, and, the malting company is one of them, and among a couple of the others. And all the way through the winter and into the middle of spring, we were depositing some pretty good sized checks every month. And it's this steady income. It's not a whole bunch at harvest and then nothing again. And the bank, an ag bank really has a hard time with that. So that's why we went elsewhere. And it's a very different attitude with a bank that's business minded, because it's one of those, well, we need to buy such and such of equipment. Okay, go buy it, and then we'll write you a note after you bought it. It changes. It's a lot less stressful when you can address needs immediately versus having to go with your hat in hand and hope you can get some money.
So Roy, talk about the bees and about how, your bees may not be making you as much money, but when you compare it to the yield on the buckwheat and how the bees affect the yield on the buckwheat and how that makes it even much more profitable than what you anticipated going into it.
Well, I know the origin of this question because we've had this conversation. My dad came to me and said, "Are we making any money with the bees?" And I said, "Well, if you just look at honey sales, no, we're maybe breaking even. But when you have bees on buckwheat, they produce 20% more. When you have bees on sunflowers, they produce 20% more. When you have, bees on any crop that requires pollination from an insect, that's not wind, pollination like wheat, they produce more when you have bees, nearby." And so I said, "Dad, if you really want to find out if the bees are making us money, take 20% of the profit from the buckwheat and 20% of the profit from the sunflowers and 20% of the profit from the flax, and the camelina is going to be the same way, and write that over there under the bees, and are the bees making us money now?" And so we're not directly making money from it, but we are producing higher yields because we're letting nature help us do this stuff versus just, letting it try to get by on its own and fighting against it.
Yeah. So Roy, when you're at conferences, you will post these quotes that talk about challenging your thinking. Why is that so important to you that you challenge the way you think about things in your own operation? And why is it important for you to challenge me, your friend, or even encourage your audience to be challenged? Where does that come from, and why is that so important to you?
I have to quote Ray Archuleta on this. The hardest thing on the farm is not compacted soil. It's the farmer's mind. Because we're usually in a position where we're worried about making money, it's a very conservative profession, because we have to keep it going. And that's part of what makes it so stressful. But it's one of those things of why not? Why can't we raise dryland pinto beans? Why can't we drill corn? just because that's what somebody else is doing. You know, Pinot's got to be under irrigation. Corn has to be on 30-inch rows, or now they're talking 60s. Is that really the right thing for Northeast Colorado? We're a unique climate, so maybe we need to try something different. And, you know, once, you know, going back to my dad, whatever we want to try, he's not going to stand in the way of progress. And I tell you what, the first time we drilled corn, he's like, I don't know what the heck we're doing this for. It's like, well, I don't like to work on planters, so that's why we drilled corn. But it was, why not? You know, you have to flood rice. Do you really? Come to find out, they flood rice to control weeds. You know, it actually doesn't like being that wet. So all rices are dryland rices. It's just some of them do really, they respond to flooding better than others. So it's like, why? You know, it's like hanging out with a little kid, you know, 2-3 years old, that's everything out of their mouth all the time. Why? Why'd you do that? Why do we do this? Why do we do this? And we get into such a rut in ag that we raise wheat and corn. You know, we're wheat farmers. We don't have a single acre of wheat on our farm this year. You know, and when we left that CCTA conference back in the spring of 2017, I actually had made that comment just kind of as a wisecrack to see what my dad would say, and was like, someday we might not ever raise wheat again. And Dad's like, oh, whatever. Well, now we're not raising wheat. So we got to look at why do we do things. And sometimes we do things and we examine them and it's the right thing. And that reinforces it. And, you know, can we make it better? And that's what I want. That's why I want to challenge people. And that's why when I go, you know, and give my talks, is I want people to not try to copy me, because your weather's different, your soils are different, your field histories are different, all those things are different. But I want you to look at what I'm doing and say, well, what am I do? You know, what can I do different than I'm already doing? What can I ask why about? And it brings creativity back into agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we're stuck in that rut. It was wheat this year, it'll be corn next year, it'll be fallow the next year, then it'll be wheat again. Well, why? You know, and if we really want farmers to enjoy what they do, they need to be able to express their creativity and their uniqueness in what they do. And if they keep doing the exact same thing that they've always done, that stifles a person. That gets really boring, and bored people aren't happy people. And I want people to be successful. I want farmers to be able to have a comfortable life, to be able to be there for their kids, to be able to build their communities. But they can't do that if they keep the blinders on and keep doing the same thing they've always done. And that's why I always challenge people to ask why.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point, because it was 2016 or 2017 your first CCTA conference.
We had gone to CCTA back in the 2000s, but it was the spring of 17 was the first year that we'd come back after a while.
Perfect. So like that was the first conference I went to, and I think pretty sure both of us have been to every single one since then. And I think this is a great point to bring up. And I like bringing up mistakes and failures that I make so people can learn from them. That first year, you know, I was in the same deal that Lance did, and all of it was just so much over my head and overwhelming. And instead of leaning into that, you know, like and hindsight's 2020. Like, it would have been great for me to start taking Haney tests back then. And I felt like I took a lot from that conference, and I applied a lot of new stuff to the farm, to what we we're doing. But when you allow something that intimidates you to keep you from doing it, it really hinders your progress. So like, this will be the first year that we do a lot of Haney tests on our operation. And it's all because of that first year being intimidated. And then you're adding all these other things, and you keep telling yourself, well, I'll get to that eventually. And then you never get to it. And so that's why I really appreciate you in that, asking that question, because like, we need to lean into that thing that makes us, that fear that makes us uncomfortable, that fear of failure, and just push past that and begin to figure out. And like, you don't have to do it on every acre, right? You don't have to be doing 12 different crops, but try one new one on a quarter is not going to wreck you, and be committed to it. Figure out what you need to do, and how you need to try, to adjust that. The other question that I wanted to kind of transition you in, or the direction I want to bring you in now, is when did you start selling specialty items like the gluten-free brownie mix that you guys have and that you offer? And then talk about your website and what are all the products that you guys offer on your website.
Well, back in, it was probably 2017. I was dating a gal that was gluten sensitive, so she was doing her best not to eat gluten, and it really bothered me that every time we made a meal, you had to make two meals. You'd have to make her stuff and my stuff, and it's like, I don't know. To me, food brings people together, but if you're eating different things, you're not bringing people together. And but I tried some of her gluten-free stuff, and it was nasty. I wouldn't feed that to my worst enemy, kind of thing. And so we started talking about it, and her background's marketing. Fast forward a little bit, she's now my wife. Her background's marketing, and she's like, if you could do anything with your farm, what would you do? And it's like, I'd love to sell direct to the public. And she goes, well, why don't you? And it's like, well, I don't know nothing about it. She's like, we can figure it out. So, that's kind of where we started selling. We started to selling wheat flour because we had it, and I could buy a mill, and it was pretty easy. And then she was, eating gluten-free, and it's like, so I did some research, and it's like, oh, millet's gluten-free, and we can bake with that. So I started doing some research, and I milled up some flour and started experimenting, and by golly, we actually made some things that tasted really good. That it didn't taste gluten-free. That's the best way to put it. It didn't taste like it was an abomination of nature. And so it's like, well, maybe we can sell this. And when the first thing I made actually with it was biscuits, because I asked her, it's like, well, what's the one thing you haven't eaten in a long time because you're gluten-free? And she's like, biscuits. And it's like, well, let's try to make biscuits. And made really good biscuits. And so then it's like, well, what else? And it's all pancakes. And it's like, okay, well, I made good pancakes. And so those were our first two mixes. And then it's like, oh, we got to do something that's a little bit sweeter. Let's do brownies. And the brownies are really, really good. And so, that's kind of where it started, and kind of it progressed from there. We did some farmers markets up in Denver. We're actually in a couple of locations. We actually opened a new location in a market in a new location in South Littleton. It opened yesterday. We went up this last weekend to stock stuff. But it was just kind of that progression. And of course, her background in marketing really helps. And so started digging around and finding what is there for bags? What is there for this? What is there for that? And when we started doing bees, well, selling honey is a no-brainer. Dry edible beans, that's a no-brainer. But the gluten-free mixes is kind of the one that kind of made our own special ones. And Right now we got 5 different mixes. And actually there's a couple more that I've tested with, but I haven't finalized the recipe yet. So hopefully we'll actually have a peanut butter, a nut butter cookie where people add their own cashew butter, almond butter, peanut butter. I tried it with Nutella and I was a little too runny with that. But just a different diversity coming out in the next couple of months, hopefully. And then with that, we started doing the online sales. We actually do delivery in Boulder and Wheat Ridge twice a month on Saturdays. And it was just, part of the reason I wanted to do this was to meet the consumer, to meet the public, to be able to communicate what really happens with your food, to understand, why does somebody apply glyphosate? Why does a farmer do what they do? And that was really the big push, was to be able to educate, because my dad has always said, ever since I was a little kid, that's the most important thing a farmer can do, is education. And then it started to be a little bit profitable, and there's actually been discussion of hiring somebody part-time to do stuff like that. My wife with the bees has started to take the beeswax, and she makes soaps, lotion bars, and lip balms that they've gotten a pretty decent little following on. And it's just something extra that we could do to help support the farm, and to meet people, to let them know why agriculture is so important, and why farmers are so important. And then, it's kind of gotten its own life from there.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love all the things that you guys are doing. It's so cool and encouraging and inspiring at the same time. What's been the biggest challenge in the last 6 years? Like, what was something that was adversity that you faced that you had to overcome?
The lack of rainfall. Because if it rained nice and regular, I have a friend that farms in Hickory, North Carolina, that just happened to set the national dryland corn yield record at, was 459 bushel per acre or something like that. And I was talking to him this last June. He calls me up and he goes, "Roy, how's it going?" I said, "Russell, it's dry." And Russell goes, "Oh, I know, man. It hasn't rained for like 3 days." And it's like, dude, you don't need to talk to me about this. It hasn't rained for like 3 weeks, And so it's our biggest challenge is our weather. Really, the other stuff, I've been really lucky. It just seems like everything that I've tried, it either works straight out of the gate, or it works well enough that it's like, oh, we just need to tweak it a little bit and run it again, and it's it does work. But my dad's been super supportive. My parents both have. When I decided to go continuous crop, my mom's like, "It'll never work." She's like, "I've lived here since 1950 on the farm since 1950, and we don't get enough rain to do continuous crop." And this last year, when it was so dry, the buckwheat died in the field. And I went to my folks, and I was like, I was really beating myself up because it's so dang dry. And my mom looks at me and she goes, "It's okay. We just raised a cover crop this year." And it was just like, what a difference in attitude in 5 years for someone who's, up there in years, to be able to see the difference that the farms, these regenerative methods have been making, and to be supportive of it. It's been great. So other than it could rain a little bit more, I really don't have anything that I put my finger on and go, "Oh, this is such a horrible situation." Everything keeps rolling. When you clear a year like this, it's the worst year in rainfall in the history of our farm, and we broke even. and I got nothing to complain about. There's people in the world that's got a lot more problems than I do, Jay.
Absolutely. Let's close with this story because it's one of my favorite stories. Talk about the brownie mix and the lady with the gluten intolerance and how she responded.
I was invited to represent farmers in a booth at an event in Denver called Slow Food Nation. And slow food is the opposite of fast food. So it's stuff that's homemade, that's prepared with your own hands. And I was talking with these people, and they invited me, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to have samples." And it's like, "What are you going to have samples of?" They're, "Oh, we're going to have sourdough bread." I said, "Well, do you have anything for gluten-free?" And they're like, "No." And it's like, "Well, I'll bring some gluten-free stuff. I'll bring some of my brownies because my brownies are really good." And they're like, "Yeah, you can bring brownies." I'm like, "Well, how many do I need?" And they're like, "Oh, bring about 300. And I'm just like, "Oh, crap." And that's a lot of brownies. So instead of being a good sized brownie, it's turned into like a nice little sample. And this was like first part of July. So right in the middle of wheat harvest. And so I pushed like hard, real hard to get wheat harvest done. So that way I could be gone for a couple of days and I wouldn't have to worry about it. So I had been ignoring, they've been sending out these emails about the event, and I've been ignoring them all. And so I finished up harvest. I got everything put away. I got home about 10 o'clock at night, the night before the event. And it's like, okay, it's time to make brownies. I got 300 brownies to make tonight. So I start making brownies, and I'm in the middle of all of this. And it's like, I don't even know where this thing is. So I better go read the emails and find out where I'm driving to Denver tomorrow. And I look it up, and it's going to be in the Larimer Square. And it's like, wow, that's a pretty good sized spot. And they were talking about, well, last year it was a super successful event, and they had 15,000 people show up. And I thought, great, I'm showing up with 300 brownies and 15,000 people are going to be there. So I go there and meeting people, and it was interesting to see people's response to being a farmer, because they're like, "Oh, what are you doing?" It's like, "I'm a farmer." And I had a number of people that thanked me for being a farmer, and it kind of took me back. But we were handing out these samples, and I'd always be like, "You want a brownie?" And they're like, "Okay." And I'm like, "It's gluten-free." And then they're like, "Nah, that's good. I'm not so interested anymore." And it's like, "Well, they're really good." And they're like, "No." And so there's this young gal, probably mid-20s, came around, and I was like, "Would you like a brownie?" And she's like, "No, I can't." She goes, I just was, she goes, I don't eat gluten. And it's like, "Oh, they're gluten-free." And she's like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so, she tried one, and I looked at her, and she started tearing up. And it was just like, oh, it's kind of not expect that reaction to my brownies. I think they're good, but maybe they're not. And I was just like, are you okay? What's going on? And she was like, "I was diagnosed with celiac disease 2 weeks ago. And at that point, I figured I would never be able to eat anything that tasted normal again, or anything that tasted good again." She goes, "I had actually given up on things tasting good." And she goes, this is amazing that this is gluten-free and I can eat that. And so, at that point, it really drove home to me that, and I talk about this when I speak, is everything we raise is food. It might not be people food, it might be animal food, but everything we raise is food, and we need to treat it as such. And it really, food affects people's lives. And when you don't have food allergies, you don't think about it. But I now have a number of friends that are celiacs, and the fear of eating something that will put you in the hospital for a week just because it happened to sit next to something in a restaurant kitchen. I don't have that problem. But when you have friends that struggle with that, it really drives home how important good quality food is. And the work that we do is incredibly important to They talk about, farmers feed the world. You know what? We're feeding our neighbors. And if we're not raising something that's good quality that we wouldn't eat in our own homes, what are we even doing it for? And so when we produce this food, we need to think about who is going to be eating this, and how does it feed them, and more than, does it feed them just on the physical level, or when they connect with their food, then that feeds them on a different level. And it really is better for all of us, including the farmer.
Yeah. Well, Roy, on that note, I'd like to share with everyone, you're going to be speaking in Salina at the Soil Health U on January that's 18th and 19th. And then you're going to be at the High Plains No-Till Conference on the 7th. No, yeah, the 7th and 8th of February in Burlington, Colorado, and then Soil Health Use in Salina, Kansas. Are there any other places they can hear you speak, Roy?
Right now, those are the two main ones. My wife and I are actually developing a marketing workbook, and we're going to start doing marketing sessions on how to present yourself for specialty markets, how to build your brand, how to do all those kind of things. And tentatively, the first one of those is going to be in Oklahoma, but it's kind of been postponed because scheduling is a nightmare. I might be speaking in Oklahoma at their Soil Conservation District annual meeting, but they haven't got back to me on that one. But the one at Salina and Burlington are the two big ones. Personally, the conference in Burlington, I'll be honest, I'm on the board. And the reason I'm on the board is because it's worth my time. It is a heck of a conference for the money that people spend to go there, and you meet really good people, and you learn and grow so much at that event. And I will say the presentation at Salina is a different presentation that'll be at Burlington. So it's not, I won't be doing the same bit every single time. And to be honest with you, every time I do a presentation, it's not scripted. So it changes from time to time. It changes every single time anyhow. But those are the two big ones. And, I'm always picking up different ones from here and there. I've started getting a web page put together that has that stuff, but it's in its infancy because I got a 3D printer, and it's a whole lot more fun than doing a website.
Sure.
But so yeah, that'll be getting out there, and that's roypfaltzgraff.com. Our marketing stuff is Bar 71 Consulting. That's our family brand, and people talk about brands and they don't think about what the original brand was, and that's the one that goes on the hide of an animal, and that's where brand came from. And our farm's brand is a Bar 71, which is a single iron brand, which is something to be a little bit proud of in Colorado, at least. So, but those different places, people can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn are kind of the two ones that I'm active with. We're looking at doing some stuff on YouTube. Thanks to Jay, you're a bit of a motivator on there. And my wife keeps pushing me. One of these days, I'll actually follow through with it, and it'll make her happy. But people can email me and stuff. After you posted that presentation, I actually had a gal call me. She's originally from the Ukraine, and she's looking for buckwheat markets in Europe. And it's like, that's a little bit outside my realm right now, but I'll see what I can do. But yeah, just always available to help people, get some ideas to think about. And to be honest with you, we touched on the tip of the iceberg of all the crazy stuff that we do, and got some really exciting things coming up this next year that hopefully the experiments we'll learn something at least.
Awesome. Well, Roy, thanks a lot for being on the show. And next week we'll have Kevin Wiltsey. We'll see you guys then. And thanks for tuning in.